My name is Mark Cross, and I teach several of the online classes. I also went to Berklee back in 1986. And I've been working in the industry for over 25 years now, hence the highlights that I've paid dearly for. I've moved out here in the early 90s to work in the entertainment industry. I think my first big break was co-producing the score and the soundtrack to a movie called Beavis and Butthead Do America. And to our shock and awe, it was quite successful. And so since then, I've had a pretty good career working in music production, in TV and film, working in a lot in film, in comedy like Meet the Parents, Meet the Fockers, more drama like Seabiscuit and Alien Resurrection, also more feature animation like Pixar's Cars. I also mixed the music for the show ER for the last 10 years that it was on TV, as well as dozens of others. And for the last 10 years, I've been working as a composer, writing primarily for television. And throughout that time, especially in the last 10, 15 years, I've been writing for music libraries, which is what I'm going to talk to you about today. And if you do have questions, I'll ask you to just hold on to them, and then at the end, maybe we could do like a little Q&A at that time. So, first of all, what are music libraries? Music libraries are businesses that supply music for music supervisors, for TV shows, for films, primarily when the project does not have a big budget for a composer, or maybe even the musical scope of the show is so vast that they don't feel that a single composer can cover all the ground, as effectively as they would hope. And so in that instance, you have television shows, films occasionally reaching out to these music libraries to provide different genres of music to them so that they can fulfill those areas of the shows that do need them. And basically how they work is that a music library per se will have a roster of composers, and they will reach out to those composers to supply a variety of different styles of music to broaden their music base. And so that said, a lot of times if you're interested in this sort of thing, you could actually go on Google and look up music libraries, and you can find some of the big ones. And you can see when you go to their websites that they have different styles that they try to offer. Some of the ones like emotional, suspense, rock, blues, any sort of category that you can imagine is covered in a music library, even seasonal music, holiday music, that sort of thing, polka, klezmer, anything is fair game. It's interesting, my wife is a producer also. It's kind of family business, I guess you would say. And she worked on the show, she was a producer on the show Curb Your Enthusiasm. And the main title to that show was from a music library. It was written in the 70s by some guy who just put it in a music library, and one day Larry David heard it and licensed it and said, someday when I do my own show, I'm going to use this as my main title. So it's fascinating, where this stuff is. When I first got involved in music libraries, I was trying to write hipper music and that sort of things that I was interested in, and then I realized the more vast you could be, or the more diverse you could be, the more success you could possibly have. And so basically, when a music library works with a TV show, there's a couple of ways in which they operate as far as business-wise. If a music library was to license your music for a TV show or to use your music through them, they would usually have sometimes they'll have an upfront licensing fee. So X amount of dollars, let's say for example, they give you $100 as a licensing fee to put 10 seconds of one of your tracks in America's Next Top Model. And so sometimes the deal would be that you would split that fee with the music library. So they get $50, you get 100, or you get $50. Well, that would be an interesting deal. You get 50, I get 100. I haven't gone into that situation yet, but it's nice to have a dream, I guess. Anyway, in addition to that, which really ties into why we're all here, is you have what are called the PROs, the performance rights organizations. And they deal with royalties-based, performance royalties when your music is broadcast on television. And that is what is sometimes termed as the back-end money. And when that happens, you have two different people that will split the money. 50% of the royalties will go to the publisher, 50% will go to the writer. And usually, with most music libraries, their business model is based on the fact that they'll take the publishing and the writer will take the writer's royalties. And that's a standard kind of deal that most music libraries do. There are other music libraries that actually take the publishing and actually want a piece of the writer's share too. And so each business model works differently, but that's basically what it's all about. And so I know that when I first got involved, I was looking more towards the back end. You know, getting $50 and $100 here and there, of course, is great. There's nothing wrong with that. But it was really the back end money that was the most appealing to me. And so that's really how those models work. I heard a few of you talking earlier about exclusivity and that sort of thing. And when you work with a music library to provide music for them, you are going to enter into a contractual agreement. Did I say that? Does that word work? If not, it's a word now. Anyway, within your contract with the music library, it is going to specify whether your music is exclusive or non-exclusive, and it's always good to, you know, specify that up front so that you don't get into any issues along the way. And then, of course, in that contract, you will, you know, understand the business model of that music library, how the splits work. Do you get to share in licensing fees? Do you get to split, you know, do you get all of your writer's share and they get the publishing share? And like I said, every situation is different. And there was one show actually that I was on. I was a lead writer on a show called Last Comic Standing. And so with that, and I don't know how this happened, but needless to say, no one ever asked me for my publishing. And so when the music supervisor and I talked about it, he didn't even know to ask. And I said, well, I'm just going to take my publishing. Is that cool? And he said, yeah. And so that was great. So rather than just getting my writer's share, I got the publishing. And of course, that was a primetime TV show that also played throughout the world. So that was a nice little bump on that. That was a lucky little thing that happened. And so it's good to be educated along those lines should you go down this path so that you know to ask the right questions and or just to know when not to ask the questions and just sort of navigate through, you know, your situation. Getting started in music libraries is interesting. I mean, I got started just by a fluke. I was out to dinner one night with a bunch of people, and this girl I know was there with her boyfriend, and she introduced me. We got along. We had similar taste in music. He told me he was an attorney, and he said, oh, I'm putting together a music library. And I said, oh, good for you, you know. And he said, you must write music. You know, give me some of your music, and I'll try and get it out there and make you some money. And I was, you know, young and naive. I didn't know. I was like, okay, but you know, I thought for a second there. I remember when I grew up initially in Chicago, and before I moved out to California, I was writing music for commercials and advertisement and stuff like that. And so, as you can imagine, for every spot that I would submit 3 or 4 different pieces of music, and if I did get it, one would get it. And then those other 2 or 3 pieces of music that they didn't like would go into what I called my little music orphanage, because there was, you know, no home for them. And as my orphanage started to fill up, it sort of, you know, rang a bell when this guy said, hey, do you have these spare tracks? And I was up front with them. I said, you know, I have this orphanage. And I said, but there's a reason why they're in the orphanage, you know? I don't think they're that great. And he said, oh, trust me, I'll get them out there. And so I did. I gave him a couple of dozen tracks. They were anywhere from 60 to 90 seconds long. And lo and behold, within the first year, I started getting checks from ASCAP, because I'm registered with ASCAP as a writer and as a publisher. And they were really small at first, $18 here, $37 there, that sort of thing, but I was getting checks, and that was kind of cool. And so I started to realize, okay, so there's some money to be made here if I could add to this. And so I started to write a little bit more. I gave some more of my tracks to the library. And then an interesting thing happened, which is, and I'm sure those of you who have ever been in a relationship probably know this scenario. There I was sitting on the sofa with my wife watching TV, and she had the remote. So we're watching her cooking shows, whatever, the home shows, and I'm sitting there going, oh, I don't like this. And then I'm watching this show where it was one of those home shows where they're, remodeling a home or something like that. And I noticed they were playing the music in the background was kind of like Leonard Skinner. And I was like, geez, I could do that. I could do a track like that in like 10 seconds. That's C, G, and D with a groove. And there's no melody, so the dialogue works. I get this. All right, honey, you good? I went back into my studio, and about an hour and a half later, I had a track, very much like that. And I started to realize, okay, these are the shows that are using my music. I see them on my cue sheets. Cue sheets are the sheets that the TV shows submit to let the writers know where the music is being, or actually to let ASCAP or BMI or whoever. Can I say that? Well, I just did. To let the PROs know, what has been played, so that they can divvy out royalties. And so anyway, I thought, wow, I should start paying attention to these shows and seeing what kind of music that they're using, because I should start giving them what they want. I might be interested in doing blues tracks or doing this or that and the other thing, but why waste my time? If I'm just going to be doing this for a show, I should give them what they want. And so I started doing more of that. And as I got a few sort of Leonard Skinner type tracks, or at least of this show that my wife was watching, I also started to notice who was providing the music. I'd read the credits, or I'd freeze the credits, because in TV they go so fast. Or I'd go on IMDb and figure out who the music supervisor, who's providing music for this show that we're watching. And then I would reach out to them and try and navigate my way so I can get a meeting, or somehow say, hey, look, I'm a writer. I've got experience writing music for these libraries. Oh, and by the way, I have a bunch of new tracks that I haven't submitted anywhere that are really like your show. And so it was that sort of thing that got the ball rolling, and I started to meet more people, more music supervisors, and other music libraries. And then fast forward to where we are right now. I have well over 1,000 tracks registered in 3 different music libraries. And that has, now my checks are a lot bigger than $17 and $37 and that sort of thing. But it's something that I did over time, and this is something that I started in 1994. And so over the last 20 plus years, I've added, a lot, to what I've contributed to the library. Now, another thing that you have to take into consideration if you're going down this path, and I'm sure most of you already have something like this, but you need some sort of home studio, some sort of way that you can create this music. It can be as simple as a laptop computer with a digital audio workstation. I like to use a program called Logic. I also use Ableton Live and Pro Tools. And then I have a wide array of different samples and different sound libraries that I use in writing. I'm also a guitar player, and so I also, in addition to having a computer-based digital audio workstation, I also have a really nice interface and microphones to mic my acoustic guitar or any of my stringed instruments that I do play. And so that has been a substantial investment. I think in my family it's also been referred to as my money pit. But it's cool. It's my hobby that generates a substantial amount of income for my family. So, I can justify buying a new guitar here and a new microphone there. And that's really cool because it is part of our income. Also, when I buy new musical instruments and stuff, then it becomes a tax write-off. And so that's another thing. So having a good studio environment is crucial. Because mainly what I found is then, and I just figured this out as we all do at some point, well, if I'm watching this reality TV show, someone else is too, and so other people are contributing music to these libraries, and I found that it has become very, very competitive, really competitive. In fact, as I started to pursue this a little bit more professionally, I went out to some of the bigger libraries to just kind of test the waters and see where things were at. And some of the bigger libraries were licensing music from people like Hans Zimmer and James Newton Howard. They were getting their throwaway tracks. Now, their throwaway tracks were, I'm sure, a lot better than what was in my orphanage. But nonetheless, I thought, wow, okay, so now I'm competing against these guys, and they're really good, In fact, I look up to a lot of these people. I've been fortunate to work with some of them, and it's hard to be in a professional environment and still sort of like be in awe at the same time. But also it made me realize, okay, well, if I'm really going to take this to the next level, I have to literally take this to the next level. I have to up my game. I have to make sure that the sounds that I'm using are contemporary, and that my writing is better, and so on and so forth. And so, and I also realized as I was working more and more with music libraries that they were contacting me. In fact, as I was just sort of moseying back there, I got an email from one of them, and I'll read that to you so you can see what the call sheet is like. It says, "Hey Mark, America's Next Top Model is back for Cycle 23 on VH1. And this is what they want. They want up-tempo hip-hop, and then they give me like 4 or 5 different examples. They want length for 1 minute and 30 seconds to 2 minutes long, as soon as possible." And so the reason why I bring this up is because if they sent this to me, I would be a little naive to think if they just sent this to me. I'm sure that they sent this to a few dozen other writers within their inner circle. And so anyone who's interested in doing this, who got that email, is going to act on this. So that means if I submit 3 or 4 tracks to this, they better be 3 or 4 really good tracks, because my stuff needs to stand out so that they choose it, because chances are they're going to have 30 or 40 other tracks in that genre to choose from. So like I said, it gets very, very competitive. The fact that I have a background in music production and mostly music mixing, I think is a good attribute for me, because I know how to present my music and how to mix it so it, as I would say, so it jumps out of the speakers. When someone listens to it, I'm going to make it, I'm going to produce it as best I can. In fact, I was talking to another writer about this. I found that recently, I would say my work as a writer has become like 20% composing, 80% music production. And so it doesn't take me long to turn out a track. I can do it in fairly short order. What I'm spending most of my time on now is making it sound amazing. And whether that's using the best compressor on my bass, or different treatment on the drums, or whatever the case may be, that I'm doing everything I can to make things jump out of the speakers. I also have a friend, one of my closest friends is a mixer. He primarily mixes metal music, or at least that's what he's doing now. And he was over a couple of weeks ago, and he was telling me about this record he'd been working on. He's like, "Oh, you got to hear this stuff." And we're sitting outside, and I was like, "Cool." And I got up, and he's like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "Well, let's go into the studio and listen to it." And he goes, "Check this out." He put his phone on the table, and then he played it, and it just was amazing. And I thought, "Geez," it's like, "How did you get it to sound that great on a phone?" And he goes, "I mixed on the phone." I was like, well, I've been to your studio. You got these big monitors here, and you got those little near fields there. And he goes, yeah, and I got another feed that goes to my laptop, and then the output of that goes to my phone. And I only listen to my phone now. And I was like, oh, got to remember that one. And then I realized, oh, so when I'm submitting tracks, I'm uploading them to some FTP site or whatever, some Dropbox. And so that means that the receiver of these is going to download them to what? Probably their laptop. Okay, I got to start mixing on my laptop because now I got to know exactly how they're hearing. So these are the things that I started to, use as tools and techniques to get myself noticed, or to get my music noticed. I cared less about myself. It was more about getting the music out there. And basically, I hate to make it sound like this, I just didn't want to waste my time. If I was going to do this music, I just wanted to make sure that it was a good, efficient workflow that I had, and so that it wasn't a waste of my time. I find as I'm getting older, I have children, there's so many demands on my time right now. If I'm going to dedicate a few hours to do something like this, I want it to be great and I want it to be used. Otherwise, I would rather just sit at home and jam. I could have much more enjoyment, doing that. And so in sort of recognizing, delivery systems and that sort of thing and mixing systems, this helped me to put together a much more effective workflow in my creative process and in my professional process of feeding music libraries. So a lot of it went into identifying the marketplace, but also realizing ultimately, like I said, now, I started off with a few dozen tracks, and now I'm up to well over, I think over 1,100. And so this happened over time. And it wasn't until, the last 5 to 6 years that I realized that it really is a numbers game. Having a dozen or so tracks out there is cool, and getting a check here and there for, say $50 is great. But it's a lot nicer if you could get these 4, 5, 6-digit checks. Wouldn't that be great? And so I realized the more music that I got out there, and that the more focused my music was to their needs, that the more money it was generating for me and my family. And so that was a big part of my model for creating music for music libraries and making sure that it was being used. Also, it's a pretty quick turnaround. Like when I read that email I just got, when they say as soon as possible, I would imagine if they sent that email today that they would love it if I gave them something tomorrow. So if I got that email, wouldn't it be great if I could knock out 2, maybe 3 tracks? That's a pretty tall order. If I had nothing to do for the rest of the day, maybe. But if I could do a couple of tracks and give it to them overnight, maybe and they were good, I might get their attention, and so these are things that I have to take into consideration. If you are going to get in the game, or if I'm going to respond to this email, it's always best if I respond quickly and efficiently, because I know other people are. And like I said, there are other writers out there that are probably infinitely better than I am. And so I just need to take that into consideration as I go through my process. Last of all, I want to thank you guys for coming out here. All this stuff that I'm talking about is stuff that is part of the music production courses from Berklee Online, for which there are many. And like I said, I teach, several. And I've been doing it for well over 5 or 6 years now. And I love it. I get a big kick out of it. Like I said, I went to Berklee. I graduated from Berklee back in 1986. And it has done nothing but open doors for me, which has been awesome, especially coming from Chicago and coming out here to where I was basically no one, and sort of starting all over again, and just the Berklee name opened a lot of doors for me, which was good. And so a lot of these courses will teach you about these opportunities and how to respond. It's good to get the door open for you, but then knowing what to do once you get in the door, and then how to stay in the room, and then and continue to be, makes all the difference between having a few dozen, in my case, in this situation, having a few dozen tracks or having, over 1,100. So thank you again for being a great audience, and I hope I get to see you guys again